Before words, there were symbols. Before stories, there was silence. Before you forgot, your soul already knew. Hidden in the world's oldest traditions was a practice, one so simple yet so powerful that it was never meant for the masses. It wasn't forbidden because it was dark or dangerous, but because it was liberating. To those who held power, nothing is more threatening than a human being who fully remembers who they are. Today, many of us feel disconnected. We chase achievements, possessions, and approval, but deep inside, there's still an emptiness, a sense that something essential has been misplaced. This practice, once kept for initiates and seekers, offers a key. It isn't about adding more knowledge, adopting more beliefs, or following yet another system. It's about peeling away the layers of illusion so you can return to what your soul has always carried, the memory of your true self. So, take a breath. Feel the quiet underneath the noise. Because what you're about to hear isn't new. It's something ancient, waiting patiently inside you, ready to be remembered. The practice we're speaking of is not about memorizing scriptures, reciting mantras endlessly, or filling your head with complex philosophies. Instead, its essence is remembering the frequency of your soul, the part of you that existed before your first breath and will remain after your final one. The ancients knew this. In Egypt, initiates were led into temples not to be taught in the way we think of teaching today, but to be guided into silence and symbolism. They would go through rituals that felt like a symbolic death, the letting go of identity, name, and role, so that something deeper could reawaken. They called this remembrance of the Ka, the life force, and the eternal truth of the soul. We see the same echoes in Greece, where the Orphic rites invited seekers to step into mystery through poetry, music, and sacred drama. These weren't lessons meant to be memorized. They were experiences meant to awaken a hidden memory. In India, the practice was called smarana, remembrance. Yogis understood that liberation didn't come from piling on knowledge, but from stripping away forgetfulness. Indigenous cultures across the world also held vision quests, where the seeker would face silence, fasting, and solitude, not to learn something external, but to remember what was always within. Across all these traditions, the message was consistent. You don't need to become something else. You need to remember what you already are. That's why this practice was so precious. It couldn't be passed down like information. It could only be awakened inside each soul through direct experience. Think of it like a hidden song encoded in your DNA. You may not hear it most of the time because of the noise of modern life, but it never stops playing. The technique isn't about creating the song, it's about tuning your inner ear so you can hear it again. What makes this practice so powerful is that it bypasses the mind. The mind wants steps, explanations, and certainty. But remembrance speaks to something deeper than the mind. It speaks to presence, vibration, and resonance. It's like seeing a symbol, a flame, or hearing a sound that suddenly feels familiar, even if you can't explain why. The recognition is instant because it belongs to you already. That's why this practice was universal. Egypt, Greece, India, indigenous traditions all carried different forms of the same invitation. Strip away illusions. Enter silence. Encounter a symbol. Remember, it wasn't about gathering followers or establishing dogma. It was about returning each individual to their own sovereign soul. A soul that needs no permission, no validation, no external authority to be whole. This hidden technique has always existed, but whether you notice it or not depends on whether you're willing to quiet the noise long enough to feel its whisper. If this practice of remembrance was so powerful and universal, the question becomes clear. Why did it fade from everyday life? Why did something so natural and human become a secret, whispered in temples or hidden in fragments of old texts? The answer lies in power, A soul that remembers itself cannot be easily controlled. When you know who you truly are, you do not bow to fear, and you cannot be ruled by systems that thrive on obedience. That is why many of these practices were buried or distorted over time. In ancient societies, only a select few were allowed to walk through these initiations. The knowledge was guarded, not because it was evil, but because it created a level of freedom that could disrupt the structures of control. Imagine leaders, priests, or rulers whose power depended on keeping the masses dependent. A person who remembers their inner truth no longer relies on external approval. That kind of sovereignty can feel threatening to those who wish to govern through fear or hierarchy. As history unfolded, religion and dogma became tools of control. Rituals that were once direct paths to remembrance were reshaped into ceremonies of obedience. Silence was replaced by sermons. Symbols that once awakened inner memory became icons to be worshipped instead of keys to unlock something inside. Over time, people were taught to seek answers outside themselves rather than remembering the answers already within. This shift didn't end in the ancient world. In our modern lives, the same dynamic continues, only in different clothing. Instead of temples and rulers, the distractions are screens, noise, and constant demands on our attention. The system of forgetting is still alive, but it works through busyness, overstimulation, and the illusion of endless choice. Think about it. How often do you sit in true silence? How often do you pause long enough to feel the difference between what is truly you and what has been planted by advertising, culture, or even family expectations? Forgetting isn't always forced. Sometimes it is simply the byproduct of a world that never stops pulling you away from yourself. That is why the practice was hidden. It is not dangerous in the way people might fear. It is dangerous only to systems that rely on human beings staying small, distracted, and disconnected. The real danger was never the technique itself. The real danger was the freedom it brought. To remember your soul is to step out of invisible cages. It is to reclaim your voice, your inner compass, and your natural sense of belonging to something greater. Once you cross that threshold, you cannot be manipulated in the same way again. The ancient initiates understood this truth. The modern world hides it in plain sight. The choice, as always, rests with you. The ancients did not see awakening as one sudden event, but as a process that unfolded in stages. Just like a seed must break its shell before reaching the light, the soul too passes through phases before standing in its true strength. These phases can be described in 3 movements: deprogramming, awakening, and resonance. The first phase is deprogramming the false self. This is where you begin to peel back the layers of beliefs and voices that never truly belong to you. From childhood, we are given identities by family, society, and culture. You might have been told who you should be, what success looks like, or even what love means. These borrowed definitions create a mask that covers the soul's natural expression. To deprogram is to pause and ask simple but powerful questions. Is this thought truly mine, or was it given to me? Does this belief bring me closer to truth, or does it keep me in fear? This step isn't about judgment. It's about becoming an observer of your own inner landscape and gently separating what is authentic from what is imposed. The second phase is awakening the inner sense. Once the noise of the false self begins to quiet, you start to notice subtle signals that were always present but often ignored. This is where silence, breath, and presence become sacred tools. By practicing short moments of mindful stillness, you begin to sharpen an inner vision that does not rely on the physical eyes. Symbols become especially powerful here. Ancient traditions used images like the Eye of Horus, the lotus, the flame, or the mirror as gateways to activate remembrance. They were not just art, they were living reminders. When you rest your attention on such a symbol with an open heart, you feel a recognition rising inside you, as if something long forgotten is being touched again. The third phase is resonance with the soul's hidden name. Many cultures believe that every soul carries a unique frequency, sometimes called a divine vibration. In Egypt, it was known as Ren Neter, the sacred name that could not be spoken, but only lived. This frequency is not found through words. It is felt as alignment, as warmth in the heart, as the stillness that comes when you stand in truth. Resonance is the point where remembrance is no longer a practice you do, but a state you embody. You don't try to remember, you live as remembrance itself. These three phases form a path that is both simple and profound. Deprogramming clears away illusions. Awakening opens inner vision. Resonance anchors the soul's vibration into daily life. Together, they create the foundation for what comes next, the crossing from illusion into freedom. This crossing is not about moving from one physical place to another. It is about leaving behind what no longer belongs to you so that the real self can step forward. The Egyptians described this moment through the image of the weighing of the heart before Ma'at, the goddess of truth. They imagined that at the end of life, the heart would be placed on a scale and balanced against a feather. A heavy heart, weighed down by lies and illusions, would sink. A light heart, free from masks and burdens, would rise. Though this was often told as a story of the afterlife, it also served as a metaphor for spiritual initiation during life. To cross into remembrance, you must allow your heart to be lightened of the false self. In practical terms, this means releasing old roles, fears, and desires that were never truly yours. Perhaps you carried an identity shaped by the expectations of others. Perhaps you lived with hidden fears that told you it was safer to conform than to shine. Perhaps you chased desires that were handed to you by society rather than born from your soul. To cross is to let these things die, not in a physical sense, but in a symbolic one. It is an inner death that makes room for rebirth. This stage is rarely comfortable. Many people describe it as a sense of disorientation or even grief. You may feel like the ground beneath you is shifting, because in a way, it is. The structures that once held your sense of self begin to dissolve. But within that space, something extraordinary becomes possible: the emergence of the soul's authentic presence. The crossing is the true initiatory moment. Until this point, remembrance may feel like a practice or an exploration. At this threshold, it becomes a choice. You decide whether to step forward into a life shaped by authenticity or to retreat into familiar illusions. The ancients saw this choice as the difference between a seeker and an initiate. A seeker gathers knowledge, but an initiate allows the old self to die so that truth can be lived. For us today, the crossing may not involve temples or ritual chambers. It may look like a quiet decision to no longer carry someone else's story. It may be a courageous act of honesty, a surrender to silence, or a moment of clarity where you simply refuse to forget yourself any longer. The form it takes is less important than the essence, a willingness to release what is false in order to live what is true. Crossing is not the end of the journey, it is only the beginning. The true test of remembrance is not found in a moment of silence or a flash of awakening, but in how you live afterward. Ancient traditions always emphasize that remembrance must be woven into daily life, or else it fades back into forgetting. To live remembrance is to make every action, no matter how ordinary, an expression of your soul's truth. One way to begin is through active silence. This is not about escaping the world, but choosing to pause within it. Even a few minutes each day of sitting quietly, breathing with awareness, and listening inwardly creates space for the soul's frequency to rise above the noise. In Egypt, initiates spent long hours in silence within temple halls. For us, a few minutes of true presence can serve the same purpose. The second pillar is sacred action. Eating, walking, speaking, or even washing your hands can become a ceremony when done with awareness. The idea is not to separate the spiritual from the ordinary, but to let the ordinary become spiritual. Imagine lifting a glass of water, not as a habit, but as a moment of gratitude for life flowing into you. Such small acts, repeated often, root remembrance into your body. Mindful input forms the third pillar. What you allow through your eyes, ears, and thoughts shapes your inner world. Ancient initiates were carefully guided in what they saw and heard because they understood how impressions imprint the soul. Today, this means being conscious about the media you consume, the conversations you engage in, and the environments you place yourself in. Protecting your inner space is a vital part of sustaining remembrance. The fourth pillar is conscious speech. Words carry power, not only in how they affect others, but in how they shape your own vibration. Speaking less, but with greater depth and presence, brings you closer to your soul's resonance. A single sentence spoken with clarity can hold more truth than hours of empty talk. When your words align with your remembrance, they create harmony rather than noise. The fifth pillar is living as if. This means embodying remembrance even before it feels complete. You may not always feel connected to your soul's vibration, but by acting as if you are, you reinforce the pathway. Living as if is not about pretending, it is about choosing alignment in each moment, trusting that the state of remembrance deepens the more you live it. Together, these 5 pillars transform remembrance from a private experience into a lifestyle. They ensure that the awakening of the soul does not remain locked in sacred spaces, but flows into your relationships, your work, and your daily choices. The real proof of remembrance is not found in meditation alone, but in how you carry yourself when life becomes loud and demanding. It is the art of walking as an awakened being in an unawakened world. When remembrance moves beyond the individual, something extraordinary begins to happen. A quiet revolution unfolds. Each person who remembers sends out a signal, like a tuning fork, that influences others without needing to convince or persuade. The more souls that live remembrance, the stronger this resonance becomes across the collective. Ancient lineages spoke of this invisible network. In Egypt, there were the Shamsu, followers of light, who carried hidden wisdom across generations. In Greece, the Orphic initiates passed their remembrance through poetry and song. In India, rishis shared vibrations of truth through chants and silence. Indigenous tribes passed their knowing through vision quests and oral traditions. Though separated by geography and culture, all of them understood one simple truth. Remembrance grows stronger when shared. What makes this awakening different from movements or religions is that it does not depend on leaders or institutions. It is not tied to algorithms, trends, or doctrines. It happens quietly in homes, in conversations, in moments of stillness, often unnoticed by the outside world. 2 people sitting in silence with open hearts can ripple more remembrance into the collective field than 1,000 shouted slogans. In today's world, this collective awakening is re-emerging in subtle ways. You might notice more people questioning inherited beliefs, stepping back from noise, or seeking deeper meaning. You may find yourself drawn to symbols or practices that feel ancient, even if you cannot explain why. These are not isolated events. They are signs of a larger remembering taking place across humanity. The beauty of this awakening is that it cannot be stopped. Power structures can suppress information, distract with noise, or even ridicule practices of remembrance, but they cannot extinguish a vibration once it is felt. Just as a seed will eventually break through concrete to find the light, the soul's frequency will always find its way back into expression. For those walking this path, it is important to remember that you are not alone. Even if your immediate circle does not share your journey, countless others across the world are feeling the same stirrings, asking the same questions, and stepping into the same remembrance. You are part of an invisible lineage, not bound by time or geography, but connected by frequency. Living remembrance within yourself is powerful. Living it while knowing you are part of a collective awakening is transformative. It shifts the focus from personal liberation to shared evolution. Every soul that remembers makes it easier for another to do the same. The network grows, not through force, but through quiet resonance. This is the true meaning of collective awakening, a return not just for individuals, but for humanity as a whole. It is the weaving together of ancient memory with modern lives until the world itself begins to reflect remembrance. This journey has not been about learning something new. It has been about remembering what was always yours. The forbidden practice is not hidden because it is dark, but because it is powerful. It returns you to your soul, to a truth that no system, belief, or authority can take away. You have walked through the invitation, the hidden technique, the reasons it was buried, the phases of remembrance, the crossing, and the way it becomes a lifestyle. You have also seen how it extends beyond the individual into a collective awakening. All of this leads to a simple truth. This is not about leaving your life. It is about transforming your life from within. To live remembrance is to eat, walk, speak, and love with awareness. It is to carry silence within the noise of the world. It is to remember in each moment that you are more than the roles you play. Right here, right now, you can choose to affirm it, not as empty words, but as vibration. Whisper it inwardly, I remember. Let those two words sink into your heart until they feel like a pulse of truth. If this message resonates with you, share it, not just through clicks or numbers, but as part of weaving remembrance into the collective field. Together, we strengthen the silent revolution already unfolding.